for gardeners. There's a whole process by which you make it, how it's incorporated into the soil. So the first 3 pages are, my experience of making a compost pile. And then he goes into the literature about compost, why compost is important, how you make it, how it can be good or not so good. And then the last part is a summary. So, and the breakdown should be about that, about 3 pages of experience, about 5 pages of references, and about 2 to 3 pages of summary.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in the part where it's personal, do you talk about yourself in the first person?
In the first person, absolutely. So that first part can be first person. The second part is typically not first person. The third part could be either.
She's not feeling well.
And once you create that format in your mind, it can be very efficient to move through an ILP. The biggest problem that most people have is they write their experience.
Yeah, that's kind of...
And because some of our language sort of seems to imply that that's going to be okay.
And I think from my standpoint, I've had 25 years on the job. I'm trying to put too much into the experience side of things when I should be maybe scaling that back. And that's where I'm really messed up right now, because my whole focus area is ILPs.
Well, I'm glad we're spending time on
Yeah,
this.
this is great.
This
so
is really useful for you.
really useful. So
that's another really good point, Dennis, because in fact, as we've talked about all week, learning is kind of this big mushy thing. It's not little boxes. It's kind of, and particularly if you've been in a field for 25 years, you haven't got a little box. You've got this big, embracing lot of information. So one of the things you want to think about is how you can create boxes out of the big, the big morass of what you know. One of the ways that I've found is really useful in the focus area, and remind me to go through the 2 different processes for everybody to remind me what those are. Use a case study. The case study is the most efficient way to create a simple paper for your focus area. So if you're going to say,
develop a budget.
Can develop a budget. There's a good one. Don't try to talk about budgeting in general. Books have probably been written, sure. Encyclopedias possibly. Instead, take us through a real budget process. So your case study is, here's the budget I developed for such and such a project. Your reference work is, the mini research paper, your 5 pages there is, here's what people say about budgeting. And then your summary would be, looking at the literature about budgeting, I see that in my work I tend to use Model A, not Model B. I have found that Model B doesn't work in our circumstances and so forth. So you kind of reflect on how your experience is illuminated by that literature.
Okay, I get it.
Case studies really work for the focus area.
Oh yeah,
that's a great idea.
Because it gets you focused. The hardest part about doing papers in the focus area is, where do I start? I've got all this information, and I'm going to say, can manage people. Oh, okay. How about a case study in firing someone? Now that's something you can write about. And then you bring in, here's what happened. And then you bring in, here's some of the legal aspects, here's some of the, managerial aspects. You bring in these different things, break it down. As a converger, that part should be easy for you. And then your summary. I do want to talk about the 2 separate ways of the 2 processes. In a way, the focus area is easier in that you have faces to put to the audience. You are writing it for your committee. The process is the same either way, but there's kind of an extra step if it's outside the focus area. So there's a proposal form, fill that out. Actually, I always suggest that the simplest thing is send a note first to your mentor, or if it's in focus area, mentor and PA saying, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Think it'll fly. Before you do that whole proposal, just check it out. Because if you're like way off, don't do the proposal. sorry, welcome back, Mo. Don't do the proposal, do a kind of quickie, send an email, make sure you're on target. Assuming it's on target, do the proposal. Then sit down and, one great part about the framework of starting with your experience is experience is the easiest to write about. So just start writing about what actually happened. Then move into the research. And by that time, you've kind of framed it out. If you're doing the focus area, send the note, do the proposal, do it, send it to your mentor and your PA. They're the only ones who read it. You already kind of know them, so it's not like some stranger, out there evaluating it. In my experience, what happens if someone wants it, kind of revised, it's a kind of gentle process. We just send a note back, you do it. We don't fill out these forms and say revise it in such and such a way. It's kind of a, back and forth. And then you revise it, and then we submit it. Once we submit it, it goes to the loop, and they run it through, turn it in to make sure there's no plagiarism in it. We don't do that. It's done automatically downtown. It's all done. Everything now is done electronically. You will never have a hard copy ILP. All goes through the electronic system. If you're doing it outside the focus area, it's a little bit different in that it goes to the mentor only, and I don't teach in every competence. You may think that I know all, but I don't. Darn. So I will take my best stab at whether I think it meets the competence. But I cannot predict who will evaluate it, and I cannot predict how they will respond. I like to tell my students that I will be the first one to tell you if it ain't going to fly, because I think people would rather hear from someone they know that more work is needed rather than send it through and then have some total stranger say no, it won't fly. And I particularly like to help people if it's like not on the subject at all. Better to get that up front. So like, send a note to your mentor saying, I'm thinking of doing an ILP on such and such, think it'll fly. Then do the proposal. If it's in the liberal studies or the lifelong learning, then the mentor takes the first stab, makes sure it seems to fit the competence. Then it goes on to someone who's an expert in that field. And that person will then review it. And one very nice thing is we've got a new manager of this, and she has put everybody on a short leash. You are not only given it, you are given a date it's due. It used to be that they would kind of go to the back of somebody's pile and 2 months later you'd be like, what's happening with my ILP? Now we're given 2 weeks, get it back to me, So the system sped up a lot, which is very nice. So it goes to somebody who teaches in that area, they review it, and they get back to you with 3 possibilities. As I've said, you can get it rejected, but that's really unlikely. And usually if it's rejected that this does not fit this competence, I suggest it be put in that competence. So what you have to do is you have to look at it in terms of another competence rather than it gets flat out rejected. There was a case of someone who was really not going to listen. She crocheted a long blue scarf, and she wanted a competence in A2, creativity, for crocheting a long blue scarf. She handed in the scarf. Okay, there was absolutely no way to prove that she actually made the scarf. That aside, she did not write anything, and she would not write anything. And so the mentor said, you have to write about the scarf, and she wouldn't. So it came to the second reviewer. The second reviewer said, this is not an ILP, this is a scarf. And you have to write something. And the student said, no, it's a scarf, judge the scarf. And then it got rejected.
It's not the art fair.
It was sort of strange because...
That's a stubborn.
Yeah, stubborn, thank you. It's like, okay, there was the incident of the blue scarf. But the possibility of getting rejected is very, 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 very small. Very, very tiny. So instead and then the possibility of getting it absolutely perfect, go ahead, 25, 30%. Some do, they're well worked and, but the majority say, 50 to 70%, probably 70%, get sent back with instructions as to what to do now. So haven't looked at something. Or, I often get ones where people just, in the sciences particularly, they think it's one thing and it really is another, and I ask that they redo the introduction and put it in a different competence. Might take an hour to do. But we're supposed to give you specific instructions. We're not supposed to say, this needs a little more work. What the hell would that mean? You're supposed to say exactly what more work.
I didn't understand beef it up when I got my email back from my new faculty mentor. She just said, add some more we're excited to beef it up. But what the heck's that mean? I mean, it's like, okay.
Well,
now I understand what you're talking about now.
Yeah.
Huh?
The research.
Yeah, do the research. Yeah, well, I mean, that would have been nice.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. I'm a lot more formulaic than most people, by the way, because I found as a writer, I need, like if I got a cookbook, I'd do better than